For millions of Muslim Americans, discrimination, hostility, and threats of violence are a reality. Fear of Islam has deep roots in American society, and the result of Islamophobia can have serious mental health implications for the Muslim community. Dr. Farah Abbasi is assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry at Michigan State University and staff psychiatrist at MSU Student Health Center. Dr. Abbasi, thank you so much for being here to speak to the psychological effects of Islamophobia.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here today.
It has become a mainstream racial justice issue. What do we know about the roots of Islamophobia in American history? 9/11 was certainly a flashpoint, but the anti-Muslim sentiment predates that.
You know, Islamophobia is an Anglo-American phenomenon. We can trace its roots back to colonialism, where the British justified its rule on Asia and Africa, and the Orientalism, the philosophy of exclusionism, and others are inferior, white race was superior. So what happened was the missionaries brought this kind of message back to America. And what we see is then this evangelical literature that purported Islam as this demonic religion, intrinsically violent, Muslim men is angry and women is suppressed and need to be saved. So all this we see getting into the fabric of American society. So it's very interesting. I was trying to read a little bit of history. Almost a century ago, a New Yorker with the name of Muhammad Alexander Russell Webb, he observed, he said that if a Turk, Egyptian, Syrian, African commits a crime, we don't talk about their nationality, we say a Mohammedan has done it. But if an Italian, Irishman, German, or Spaniard commits a crime, then we say it's an Italian committing a crime, a German committing a crime. They never talk about them as Baptist, Catholic, or Christian. So this was happening centuries ago. And it's so interesting that Jefferson did not intend it to be this way. He brought a Quran in almost like 11 years before he drafted the Declaration of Independence. He bought the Holy Book Quran and tried to understand that how it can apply to English law. He wanted America to have a religious pluralism, have tolerance for other minority religion. He envisioned Muslim citizens to be part of this country. And that's why the First Amendment was passed. But it's interesting, even if you look at those debates at that time, the constitutional debates and the religious test for presidency, there are concerns that what if a Mohammedan becomes a president? So then they decide to keep religion out and not create a religious country. So it's very interesting how this systematic racism and institutional racism kind of turned into Islamophobia over a period of time.
Largely perpetuated by fear, and like all phobias, that fear runs counter to the facts. 9/11 happened only a few months after you immigrated to the U.S. What did you witness in your community in the wake of those attacks?
Very confusing, very concerning, very scary. We were kind of having an existential crisis, like the hyphenated identities. Am I Muslim American? I'm American Muslim. Are these two parallel concepts? You have to choose one or over the other. I saw parents telling the children not to talk in their linguistic language or their native language, or not to wear traditional clothes. Women were told to stay invisible. But you know what? In Islam, it says with every hardship there is ease. And that every moment of crisis can also be an opportunity to grow. So I think some of us who were desperately hanging to this dream of America, we wanted we didn't want to give in. So this kind of shook us out of our complacent attitude, right? We no more could take things for granted. So I think out of that, the resiliency also came out. The vulnerability turned into viability, but via being visible. And I see this whole new era of leadership emerging, alliance of faith leader, educationist, youth, women in hijab, leading so many movements in the country. So I think it is a very, I look at Islamophobia from mental health point of view. I look at it as a slowly trickling poison. We have always wondered how we let Holocaust happen. How could we, as good human beings, allow genocides? But then this is what happens. You start to, the otherization. Things are happening to the others. It's not happening to you. This means others are doing something wrong. So if something is happening to them, they deserve it, right? Psychocide, like you start to be treated as an inanimate object. And then you start to internalize this and you lose your identity. You start to believe that I don't matter. And this, I think we consciously, the Muslims really fought back against that. Actually found our voice. We wanted to own our authentic self, be a practicing Muslim, visibly be a practicing Muslim and a patriotic American. And I think we see that success stories right now.
Well, looking back at the last decade and in particular the last 4 years under the Trump administration, what trends have you seen in the mental health of Muslim Americans, and have interventions been created to address these trends?
Think of it as, so this is identity-based bias. I think Trump era, what it did was what we already knew we started seeing it. We became aware of it. It was unmasked. It was unapologetic, unfazed, unashamed attacks. I think of it as in terms of toxic stress. And you know what toxic stress does to you? It changes your brain structures. It changes your cognition. It affects you physically, mentally, your relationships, your academics, your sense of being. Like, it can shorten your lifespan. And what concerns me is there is a whole generation. So we are almost like 1% of the American population is practicing Muslim or identify as Muslim. But 13% or higher are younger age group. And these are the kids who were maybe 3-4 years old or maybe born after 9/11. And what have they seen? They are under suspicion, under surveillance, or constantly have to prove their patriotism. Imagine the impact it's having on the kids. The bullying rate for a Muslim kid is 2 to 3 times higher than the national rate of bullying. And it's being perpetrated sometimes by people in authority. And that scares me. If you see the surveys right now, 75% are talking about that at least they know, they themselves or someone they know have experienced this racism and prejudice. I myself, I was very, since 9/11, I felt really encouraged, engaged. I found my voice. I was I was an advocate. But these last 4 years have been hard because all of us have experienced this kind of thing. I have 3 girls that identify as American. They don't even know they're like any other country. And they were being told, go back home. Why were you hiding Osama bin Laden? I was told, if you pray as a Muslim, are you one of the ISIS? People don't understand there are more Muslims dying in this war on terrorism, on hands of terrorists. Every given day, there are more Muslims being killed, being losing their homes, their lives, be in exile, be in a refugee status. But here in this country, we still are a big asset. We comprise almost 5 to 10% of your physicians, your teachers, your fire, your army. Arlington National Cemetery has Muslim names. So, it's very interesting that in America, Islam was treated as something either foreign or enslaved, because almost 30% of slaves that were brought here were Muslims. And also what happened is that this Black Muslim experience came under focus when Nation of Islam became active in civil rights movements. So you had the dynamics of religion, racism, and we know in 1964, they tried to bring an act that said that Islam is not a religion, it's an ideology, and it should not have the freedoms under First Amendment. They tried to call these Nation of Islam as unpatriotic, not wanting to fight for America. So that part also, so it's very interesting. I think that right now the American psyche, American society is struggling to embrace this concept that Islam is very integral to America. In 2050, they say it might be the second largest religion. So it's not that we are foreign or we are we don't have an identity. We are a big integral part of this society. And as soon as we start to accept that, we can really work towards interdependence and coexistence and really work for the wellness of this country.
Well, like in all cultures.
Passionate about the topic.
Well, like all cultures, there is a stigma attached to seeking help and a big stigma around mental health. Are there interventions that are working within the Muslim community to address this?
Yes, it's very interesting that as the stress started to increase, we saw increased rates of PTSD, depression, anxiety, people experiencing panic attacks. And, this is ongoing trauma, everyday ongoing trauma. So some of the academic researchers, they came together and created Muslim mental health group, and they realized that unless we have data, we have research, we won't be relevant. So they assessed the need, they started having research done, but at the same time, think tanks started to come out, Institute of Studies, ISPU, that came into existence, other think tanks, active civil rights groups started to come in. But from mental health point of view, this Muslim mental health concept grew. And I got a grant through American Psychiatric Association. I started the first Muslim mental health conference, which is very religious in flavor, but it's very academic and it's being. So you have latest research being presented, you have cultural competency training happening, you have other expertise and training happening. But what important piece we did was we brought faith leaders into this dialogue, because we realized the stigma around mental illnesses is not going to go away unless a faith leader validates it. We are very faith-based community. Religion is very important, integral part of our very being. So bringing faith leaders in this conversation was very important. And we are very fortunate that it's 15 years of work. We have so many new organizations working at different levels of mental health, wellness, well-being. We have faith leaders acknowledging it, taking care of it. Islamic centers have counseling centers now built in. So it's like I think what I want to say is, yes, we are going in a right direction, but we have a long way to go.
In a truly collaborative approach as well. Clearly, anti Muslim rhetoric in politics plays a significant role, particularly when politicians with discriminatory views are in positions of power. What's the impact of that rhetoric? And will the successes of the Muslim candidates in the election help to change that?
It's hard to watch if in a presidential debate you hear Islam is against us. And it's very interesting. There was a survey done immediately post 9/11 that showed that 62% Americans had no idea what Islam is. And 14% were favorable and 22% were against, had some negative misgivings. But recently, what the surveys are showing, these numbers have increased. The acts of violence have increased, almost tripled. Covering your head has become, instead of as a protection that we kind of want to do, it has become a kind of a target on your head. So it is not only towards Muslim, but anyone who looks like Muslim. So that tells us that people have no idea what Muslims are, who Muslims are. They think they are Arabs, they think they are Middle Eastern. It's very interesting in this country, non-Arabs make majority of Muslims. Black Americans make majority rather than immigrants. Immigrants are growing, but it's like a comparable ratio. And most of the Arabs that initially were settled in this country were actually of Christian faith. So it's so many misinformation. And what we saw in the research, that the more you know someone, the less prejudice you would be towards them. So I became very active in political campaigns, and I still remember distinctly one candidate running for a very high office comes and tells me, "Oh, you must be the first Muslim I'm meeting." And it just boggles my mind. After so much work, you still hear things like that. So yes, it is very disheartening. It's very discouraging, but at the same time, it motivated us. And what we saw that almost 80% of people voted this year. What we saw was that almost 70% voted in favor of Democratic Party because they felt more included and accepted just because of the negative rhetoric. And these had a very strong impact on the swing states, especially in Michigan. So we also saw that we have three people elected to Congress. So you have Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, and Andre Carson, one of the senior congressmen. Then you saw 11 Muslims being elected to state elections at different states. And then you saw people being elected as police commissioners, school boards, education boards. So it's like, we are here. We are part of this process. And so I think there is huge negative impact. There is huge concern that we have, and we are continuously working on the mental health aspect, especially of our youth and women, and men also. But at the same time, I feel this being in forefront, the importance of engaging in the civic duty, participating in charities, participating in interfaith alliances, participating with other vulnerable minorities, Black Lives Matters. We had a major, we had to overcome our own internal biases and racism, but to stand with Black Lives Matters. So majority Muslim organizations and Muslim leaders stand with Black Lives Matters because of our mutual vulnerability, because of our intersectionality, commonality of our roots. So I feel like, I feel more positive today that we were able to play a major role in these current elections.
As these groups collaborate in the fight against Islamophobia, how important will it be to continue, even gear up beyond this current administration and into the future?
I think what we saw, unfortunately, what we have seen, that this Islamophobia is institutionalized right now. Muslim ban, Patriotic Act, countering violent extremism, all these under guise of safety and security of the country. Who were they? Like we know now, NYPD was having a surveillance of Muslim youth and Islamic centers. I think they caught like 160 possible homegrown terrorists. That is like over the decade, they have been able to identify maybe 160. Your average terrorist act is not being done by a Muslim. That is a fact and important piece. I think we will have to be very intentional. We can't put our guards down. We have to continuously, will have to be an advocate for ourselves, be visible, own our citizenship, own our rights given to us under the citizenship. So I think, like you must have seen in my speech, that I feel I am the new face of America. So we are here, right? We are part of this great country.
Well, there is clearly still much work to be done to combat discrimination and threats of violence against Muslim Americans. Dr. Abbasi, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with NewsPoint 360 today and your insights.
I would like to end on a very positive note, that I'm really proud to be a practicing Muslim and a patriotic American. Thank you.